Glimmers.
Takes off today. Let's hope it takes off. Hey, Brian Schrader. First and foremost, before we even get this day going, welcome back to Sports Nerds, Brian. Every week. How you doing?
Good.
Every week. We're here. You know,
rain or shine.
Rain or shine, we're here. This is Sports Nerds, folks. If you've never found us before, if this is your first foray into what the nerds of sports do, you were listening to myself, Dr. Samuel J. And what's your name?
Brian Schrader.
Dr. Brian Schrader.
Esquire. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah.
You never call yourself doctor.
I don't.
Why?
It always just results in a longer conversation than I want to have.
Hey, what does that conversation look like? Can you map that out?
A medical doctor? No, I'm not. What are you a doctor of? I have a PhD. Blah 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 blah. I don't know. It's just easier to not.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. But you should be proud of that. You know, like 500 years ago, we were a big deal. Well, 1,000 years ago.
1,000 years ago.
So we've kind of obviously lost a little bit of that social importance. But
yeah, I mean, it was a lot of work. I can tell you that.
It's like a marathon. You know, it's just. Other people are more fun to watch. You know, the sprinters are more fun to watch, but the marathon runners, you know, they shut the city down for us. So it's a big deal.
I like that.
You like that? You should need that on a t-shirt.
Your dad's?
No, it's not. That is not being handed over to. No credit is given there, Mike J. For that line. I just came up with that. See, I've had one coffee. I've had a like quadruple espresso in me. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to rock.
You gotta keep class after this. Don't waste all the gems on the sports nerd audience.
My class is so great this semester, this summer. Shout out to the class. They're extremely engaged in sports talk, sports ball. So even those who have no idea what sports are, which is it's fun. Makes for a good class. Hey,
can you believe this? I have to pause real quick and get your thoughts on this Germany loss. If you're listening live, you know Germany just lost to South Korea.
I was going to bring that
up. You were? I'm sorry. You were going to not?
No, that was perfect. That was a great transition. I'm very happy that you did that. So, okay. Germany lost. You're watching it. I mean, Germany kind of they have not been fantastic this World Cup at all. They've been not impressive.
You might say bad.
I would say bad. I was more shocked by Mexico losing by 3. I know. I understand they were in a power position. They didn't have to necessarily do a lot, but they just kind of laid a major egg. I wouldn't say that maybe they did it on purpose. I don't know, but I guess they shouldn't have.
To take a brief sidetrack, a tangent.
Mm-hmm. I love a good tangent.
You're getting into soccer over the last couple of years, but you're
Mm-hmm.
not like historically a big soccer dude.
Correct.
I can't remember if they always do this because it's every 4 years. Where on the last game in group play, they play the 2 games in every group at the exact same time, or have they done this the entire time?
I cannot remember.
It's so cool because you have both games going on at the same time where if they played them in sequence, like the result of the first game could make the second game irrelevant.
Yeah.
Or if you played the first game first, the second game could still matter, but at least those teams then know what the stakes are. Here they have no idea what the stakes are.
Yeah.
I may sound like an idiot. If you're a bigger World Cup fan, maybe they do this all the time.
Yeah.
I've totally spaced it out from 4 years ago.
So if you're
or maybe I'm usually like more US centric in my viewership, and now I'm just kind of an equal opportunity watcher. But I love the way these third games are going on when and perhaps they've done this throughout the group play, and I just haven't paying that close of attention.
No,
I love it. It's awesome.
They have not been going on at the same time, but I understand what you're saying. This kind of last game, which oftentimes they do matter, they are playing them simultaneously. So I don't know if somebody's following this right now and knows the answer.
So we're watching this morning, right? Like Germany's playing South Korea and Mexico's playing Sweden, and Mexico's got 6 points, and they almost don't make it in if Germany wins against South Korea, but they don't. And then Sweden wins. I mean, it was incredibly dramatic to watch it play out like that between the 2 games, knowing that the other side probably has no idea what's going on in the other games. Someone out there is like, "You idiot!" That's how they always do it. But
no, whatever. I'm trying to think.
I'm engrossed by the drama of the entire thing.
I think it was.
Yeah, no, that group was bizarre because you see Germany and Mexico in that group, and I don't know. At least I was like, those are probably the 2 teams that are going to make it through. And you're right, Germany just laid an egg. They lost 1-0 to Mexico, and then they lost 2-0 to South Korea, though I left before the second goal. I don't even know where that one came from. Must have been late in stoppage time.
Yeah, it was. It was unopposed goal.
So Germany beats Sweden right, 3-0, right, or 2-0, and everyone thinks they're back alive, like, oh, Germany's come back to form, and then they lose this game to South Korea. It was bizarre, and truthfully, it's possible that this day plays out a little bit differently, where Germany beats South Korea, and Mexico loses by virtue of a goal differential, right? There would be 3 teams with 6 points, so Mexico, Sweden, and Germany all with 6 points, and by goal differential, Mexico would have been out. And truthfully, that would have been an equally crazy storyline to me. That both of those teams seem like octafinal or round of 16, whatever you want to call it, quality teams. But weird stuff going on. I mean, yesterday Argentina almost misses. We could talk about the World Cup forever, but
no, I know Argentina just kind of snuck in there. You and I had talked previous in the week, kind of thinking Argentina was out, but again, just kind of setup of the other games got them in there. So the only big surprise thus far is really not seeing Germany in the knockout round. But I'm trying to think who's going to play this afternoon that's going to matter. This starts here in 45 minutes.
It's Brazil, Switzerland, Serbia, and Costa Rica.
Okay.
With 4 points, 4 points, 3 points, and 0 points. So, yeah, these games will definitely matter too, which is awesome. So we got to be done by 2 Eastern. Hey, let me ask you another soccer question really quick. What do you think of this VAR, the virtual refereeing review system?
I'm not quite sure what I think about it. It seems like, you know what, they seem to have it figured out a little bit better than some of the American sports that use replay. They seem to be way more efficient. War room. Yes, exactly.
12 dudes in there trying to figure it out.
I like that. I like the fact that
it looks cool.
They're not like under a blanket watching the review. They are, they're watching a great big screen. Exactly.
Yeah, big screen. Why the blanket?
I don't know.
The blanket. All the blanket ever did in the NFL was lead to stupid jokes. Where my buddy used to always say, I think shout out to Jared Ellis. He always made a joke that the NFL ref would go under the hood there to look at the replay, and it was just like a mob boss being like, pick the right one, or you're gonna sleep with the fishes or something like that.
It is really silly that they.
It's so dumb.
I mean, it has to have nothing to do.
The picture quality that bad or something?
That's what I was thinking. Like, is it because of glare? Because they make TVs now that make it a little bit easier to limit that glare. So
shout out Sunbright. They make outdoor TVs for that purpose. It's so bizarre.
I guess
so maybe. I mean, I just wonder if people hate this or like this or whatever, because you've had a lot of weird should there have been a penalty? Should there not have been? Offsides, onside, right? There was a goal earlier that was the one. Excuse me, the Germany South Korea one got reviewed. It was originally called offsides, and they got it right through the VAR. But there have been other calls that people are still pissed about that aren't being overturned or are being upheld in ways that people disagree with. I don't know. It definitely changes the pace of the game in weird ways. Like I'm in baseball. I'm kind of on board because I think getting it right matters a lot. But I also think it changed the sort of tone and texture of the game. You waving at me or waving at someone else?
No, I'm just waving at whoever there is watching us. Hey, everybody. How are we doing, Grammars? Good to see you. We've got Austin Hirschberger and Derek Yoder. Cheers, gentlemen. Cheers. No, it seems to come at it does disrupt the flow a little bit of the game. I totally agree.
Though it seems to be pretty quick. It's weird to me that as soon as a controversial play happens now in the World Cup, the players – instead of getting the long drawn out arguments we've had before, they just rush up and they're like, "You're going to check that, right?" And the ref's like, "Yeah, sure, I'll check it," or whatever. And that seems to be the conversation. Though, as a result of plays, even though they've been reviewed on this VAR system, we have had some weird scuffles and stuff like that. So I don't know. I mean, another example that people, if you're listening or into the World Cup, might be thinking of is there was a review on this Ronaldo kind of elbowed a dude in the face a little bit. And from my perspective, from where I sit, it looked like he was trying to elbow him and missed. So I'm okay with the yellow card, but that got reviewed and people were pissed off that it wasn't a red card after the fact. The coach from Iran was really upset about that.
Hey, we have a whole 2 weeks to talk about soccer. I don't mean to cut you off.
You don't want to just hear my –
No, we have never had fans, listeners, ask us to do a show on a specific topic. And I thought, you know what?
Let's do them right.
Let's do them right. Let's do this. Before we jump into that topic, though, I'm going to ask you about a couple things before we get into that. But we will be talking about youth sports today. Brian and I were asked by a couple listeners earlier last week to do a show just on youth sports and our take on youth sports. And then we actually got some really good questions this morning from folks who listened to the show. Again, you can reach us. The best way to reach us is probably through Twitter. We tend to check those messages very often, and that's just @_sports nerds. We're also on Instagram @sports.nerds, and then many of you are watching right now, it appears on Facebook, and that is fb.me/sportsnerds. And so you can go on there. You can watch, at least on Facebook, our old videos. Some of that stuff is on YouTube as well. We are trying to boost our YouTube subscribership so we can customize our link. So if you're not a follower on YouTube yet, if you could find Sports Nerds, it would be much appreciated. And really the easiest way to do that is probably just to go to our Facebook page. And on the left-hand side there, you can see a YouTube link. Click on that. It'll take you where you need to go. You can subscribe, and we would love you forever for that. We sent out some koozies last week to people around the world, literally. Sent some to a dude in Canada and then in the UK. So thanks to Instagram and the engagement we're getting on there, I think our brand is definitely, I don't want to say exploding, Brian, but it is expanding.
Percolating.
Percolating. Things are looking good. That's all because of fantastic fans. So thanks, everybody, for helping us out.
Do you have us on Facebook?
Right now?
I don't see it.
Yeah, you're there. I can see
I trust you. Okay.
Should I invite Brian Schrader? There's an invite.
No. You don't have to invite me.
There we go. We are getting. Look at these.
I was just trying to double check.
Jorge Macias says the ref should have reviewed the penalty against Mexico. The player from Sweden leaned into the defender. Yeah, perhaps.
Yeah, they lost that game by 3.
I know.
Or lost. No, I guess they lost by 3. You could be totally right.
Yeah, I
mean, that's a legitimate question about like when it gets used. I mean, I was sort of joking before, but it is bizarre. Like, should you be able to watch in baseball? You have a certain number of challenges, right? In football, you have a certain number of challenges. Here, it seems like I'm not totally sure where it's coming from.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I know.
More in the know probably now.
Just kind of anything that's questionable, it seems to be brought under review. Okay, so before we get into our youth sports thing, I wanted to ask you. You had sent me an article about a few thoughts about MLB expansion, realignment, and scheduling. And Al Yellen had wrote this for basically the Cubs version of Sports Nation. And so I wanted to just ask you, in particular, why were you most interested in this article?
Oh, this is interesting, and this is a shout out to the kind of the original source was a Jason Stark article that he wrote for The Athletic, but it's hidden behind a paywall, and so I didn't want to give him $5. You should though, because based on the article I sent you, the original article was pretty awesome. But this sort of makes the argument or envisions the world where if we assume that expansion is inevitable, that we're going to get to 2 more teams, and we'll have equal teams on both sides that are, not, I guess 15 is not a prime number, but are more equally divisible. If we go to 16 teams in the AL and the NL, what sort of realignment will that sort of not necessarily require, but will it probably make a lot of sense in the world of that realignment, right? So if we have a couple expansion teams, we'll have 16 AL and 16 NL teams, and it'd be possible to, go to 4-team divisions all across Major League Baseball. It might change the number of teams that we have in the playoffs. You could go to a 16-team playoff, for example, and that would make a lot of sense. It might have some impact on the DH, whether or not we have a DH in all of baseball or a DH in none of baseball. And so this article just sort of unpacks what are the ways that realignment could look like, right? There's one version of it that looks like most of the NL teams stay in kind of what is in National League, and most AL teams stay in an American League. But there's also one that redesigns or realigns the entirety of baseball along geographic lines. So it becomes much more regionalized, which also sounds really, really cool to me. The argument against this, I guess, is that it would end up doing away with a bunch of rivalry games. Like the Giants wouldn't play the Dodgers or the Yankees wouldn't play the Red Sox, or at least not in the new realigned divisions or whatever. And I truthfully expected to read this article, and there's a ton more in here. And I'm sure the Jason Stark article is at least as good, if not a better read. But it's really interesting, like some of the changes that they're saying. And these would be like a decade out, and they're not like on the table at this point, but it sounds like they're being talked about at a pretty high level inside of Major League Baseball. It's something that the new commissioner, Rob Manfred, wants to see happen, I guess. So, I mean, there's a bunch of things that we could ask. Like, would you be okay with realigning these divisions? Would you be okay with shortening the season and going to an expanded playoff? Would you be okay with designated hitter being the sort of universal rule? If we had expansion teams, where would you want to see them go? I mean, this kind of unpacks, would it be cool to have a major league team in Portland or in Charlotte, or should Montreal get a team back after losing the Expos all those years ago? So I don't know. too much probably to totally unpack here. I'm curious what your reaction to it has been after giving it a read. But I'll be honest, the short version of my reaction is I thought I would hate everything in here, and I sort of dig it.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of interesting how they cut it all up. I'm down with that. I like the NL Mid-East division too, which hasn't changed whatsoever. Cubs,
yeah, that's that second version of the realignment where many divisions look the same that they look now with just some slight changes.
One of these days we need to get on here and have an in-depth conversation about the DH, because I know where you stand on it, and I think I'm moving a little bit more towards your stance on it. Seems like I've watched a lot of really shitty NL baseball lately, and I mean, when you're given a guaranteed out every 9 at bats, or 9 times through, or 9 guys through the lineup, it does begin to hinder the game a little bit, even in a town like Denver, which is basically just a launch pad. So, but again, we'll do that.
The Rockies would be a way better team with a DH.
Yes, they absolutely would, for sure.
There are other NL teams that might be the same or potentially worse, depending on where you play and how well your pitchers hit. But
you would see,
we did this article 2 weeks ago that just sort of made the argument that sabermetrics has already largely limited what managers do, or at the very least changed what managers do. But I think there's an argument that says that managers do far less than they used to. We carry way more pitchers than we did before, and fewer bench players. And so you're not making a ton of calls. You're not calling hit and runs or steals. Those things are down in a statistically significant way. So one of the main arguments I hear in favor of the DH, I know you don't want to have this debate now, but is that it's a tougher league to manage in, because it's a harder decision when to pull a pitcher. Right, when do you pull a pitcher who's doing well because you have an opportunity to score a run, or do you send that pitcher up knowing that they might generate an out and kill a rally that you have going on, knowing that you want to keep that pitcher? And I get that calculus is harder than what you see in the AL in most situations. The exception being if you do a double swap with a DH, you can theoretically lose it. But I think that argument is not as persuasive as I like watching offensive rallies, and I hate watching them get sort of stopped dead in their tracks by pitchers who couldn't hit in high school, let alone college or the pros.
It certainly does disrupt the flow of the game in baseball when you have that happen, and it happens at least once or twice every game. I would argue you get a guy up there that's just a guaranteed out, and that.
Can I say this too? If we got rid of the DH, or excuse me, if we got rid of, if we had the DH everywhere and pitchers didn't hit anymore, you know what phrase that you would never, ever, ever have to hear in baseball again that I fucking hate? Oh, he's helping his own cause.
Yeah.
Anytime a pitcher gets a hit, it's like a requirement.
Good point. He's helping his own cause.
He's helping his own cause. Isn't he always helping his own cause? Like when he strikes somebody out, isn't that helping his own cause?
It's very cliche. You don't like cliches. I've noticed there's a lot of sayings you don't much care for. So cheers to you.
Are there more?
Yeah. I'm glad you're open about it and honest. Yeah, because now I'm going to be more cognizant of the things that I say repeatedly.
Well, listen, when I tell you the phrases I don't like, I'm helping my own cause. I guess whatever the fuck that means.
Yeah, well, it's clarifying things for your co-host for sure. Hey, before we move into the youth sports conversation, it's funny. I just got a text from Marcus, the German neighbor. He works at ThyssenKrupp, which is obviously they're known for their elevators. So I'm sure you've seen vans driving around every major city here in the States, but also around the world. They service, create, whatever, build elevators. But they also have a fertilizer company, and they do some tech stuff. But anyhow, they are a German company, and he sent me a picture earlier this morning. They had the match on in all the conference rooms in the office, and he said nobody was working. They were just there, and apparently now there's just a cloud just hanging over the entire office, which
everybody should go home.
Dude, nationalism in sports, man. This is the time every 4 years that we see it more than anything else. But let's save that conversation. I think we'll save that conversation maybe for next week, because there is an article that you and I picked up from Al Jazeera that talks about what the things the Kremlin is doing right now in Russia as people are consuming vast or massive amounts of soccer. But we'll get to that next week. For now, youth sports. Okay, let's dive right into this conversation. I mean, I think you and I probably come at youth sports from the same perspective, in the sense that we see it as this tool or technology for governance, right? It becomes a way through which we can create citizens, the kind of citizens that we appreciate. We can create gendered identity or race identity or class identity through sports. I mean, a great example of that would be just watch, go to a bar and watch, watch the Mexico game, which was last weekend. I was at a bar in the morning watching the Mexico game, right? And there's so much class and race that is just played out in how people actually perform their kind of understanding and their consumption of that sport. But I think when it comes to youth sports, the articulation of those identities, the articulation of culture through the playing of youth sports, the coaching of youth sports is often overlooked because we kind of think of it as this thing that's pure. It's not sullied by money and such. But I mean, think about things like teamwork and respect and patience. All of these things, you can go to a youth soccer match and consider how those three things are played out every match, in the shaking of hands, in the maybe the physical nature or the lack thereof of the game. All of these things, right, are training bodies, are training people for long-term kind of awareness of self or lack thereof that starts at sports. And so that's just my take on it. I'll pass it on to you, then we'll have to obviously answer some questions. But I mean, you see it, you've seen it. Your kids are a tad bit older than me, and they're than you or your kids. Yeah, sorry, than my kids.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm just a little bit older than them. You can't tell by my grizzled face. But I mean, when you see these sports play out, I mean, is this is a relatively new thing, and it's like organized sports and all of this. We can assume it's only 30, 40 years old, and is that influencing the kind of citizens that we see existing now, or the kind of athletes?
I think everything you said is true. I do think that people may not notice it, right, that all of those things are going on. But that's even itself kind of bizarre because it's the way that we sell youth sports, right? We tell parents say like, oh, I want my kids to play sports in part because they'll get exercise or whatever, but also they'll learn the value of leadership or the value of teamwork and the ability to be a good loser and to not be a bad winner and to help somebody up and when they fall down, all of that sort of stuff. Like, that's foregrounded when we say we want our kids to play youth sports. It's not really understood to be like sort of a tangential benefit, right, or an auxiliary benefit. That's not the right word, but it's not a secondary benefit, but rather it's the reason that we do it, right? And this has changed, right? You said that youth sports hasn't been around all that long, but it's certainly changed, probably even in our lifetimes, and certainly within the last 50 or 60 years, where coaching your kids or encouraging your kids to go out there and win has given way to what a lot of people sort of hate, but the kind of participant trophy model of sports where we're not keeping score and we don't really care who wins and loses and we're all winners because we play together, et cetera, et cetera. Those changes in what youth sports is, the dynamic of youth sports, are largely about what you're talking about, right? That it's not the value of sport qua sport, meaning there's nothing inherent about swimming or playing soccer or playing golf that is of value to your kids, but rather it's that extra stuff, right? It's the value of competition or the value of learning to work with other people, or all that stuff that I listed before. That's certainly about governance, that it's about teaching our kids how to understand the world and interact within it. It's life lessons for when they go to school and later on when they get jobs. That's what we're deriving from sports. That being said, I think there are still people who are in it to win it, right? And that can be problematized as well. But it's interesting to sort of parse those two kind of reasons why we might put our kids in sports or encourage them to play sports.
So if you could explain or articulate the problems that you see with how youth sports are set up now in terms of governance and obviously how they influence citizenship, can you, aside from what you've kind of laid out, what other things do you automatically see? Because I mean, there are those surface level, superficial values that, like teamwork and sharing or whatever. I need to pay more attention to my children's sermons. But are there other things that are maybe a little bit under the surface that we need to pay attention to, like standing for the national anthem, or what else would be out there? I mean,
I mean, that is definitely there.
Participation. That was one of the questions that came up.
This is a joke that I'll probably get yelled at for making, but they always do the national anthem at my kids' swim meets, and they play it over a loudspeaker. It's like a recording, and then everybody claps. I always thought that you were clapping for the performer. Should we clap for the recording?
Oh, wait.
You don't find this funny as I do.
Well, okay. I guess. Sorry,
it was apropos of nothing. We don't even have to talk about that. I thought when you watched the national anthem, it was like, good job to the people singing it or the people playing it.
It's just got.
Also, if we're gonna play a recording of it, why aren't we playing like the Jimi Hendrix version or something cool? We're playing like a pretty boring one.
That is true. It is because
my fellow swim moms and dads listen to this podcast. I'm gonna get taken to task.
So
if you're in mid-Michigan, you're right about that, right? Like the performance of the national anthem, the other stuff that we already listed, I think happens across youth sports, and that we could call kind of problem one. Problem two is that within youth sports, that there are different sort of levels or gradations of what those sports are and what people want out of them that I think reify other sort of social problems, right? We've got the difference between a competitive and a travel team versus, a more, I don't know what a good word for it is, a more casual sort of play sort of team. There's definitely an element of money inside of even youth sports, which is kind of scary, right? Like if you think your kid's going to play high level basketball, then they need to be on an AAUP team. Or if they're going to be a high level swimmer, they need to swim, private at a good private club in the winter, right? As opposed to just in the summer.
The money thing is really interesting to me because we want our kids to participate in these organized sports, and we understand the value of sports and how they are. They can be very beneficial in teaching us the right lessons about things. But if you are a parent who cannot afford to put your kids in these organized leagues, you're kind of fucked, right? Which is really interesting to me because, look at Denver. You lived here long enough. There are leagues across the Metroplex that cost a lot of money to put your kids into. So what happens if your kid is a really, really good soccer player or a really good basketball player, but you can't afford to put them in a league? Like that automatically puts you behind the curve, right? That automatically harms you. And we don't even think about these things, especially in big cities, because they're just expected that you put your kids in this stuff. Do you see that in Michigan at all, or is it a little bit more? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's happening at younger and younger ages. I don't know. When I was a kid, it seemed to me that people were really seriously playing, competitive soccer or travel team soccer, when they were maybe 11, 12, 13, around that age, kind of gearing up for high school or something like that. Yeah. Out here, you can have your kid in outrageously expensive competitive travel soccer team or a competitive baseball team, or hockey's huge out here, and that's probably even more expensive than the other two combined. But you can have them playing that high level competitive expensive soccer at age 6 or 7, and they have to try out. They have to get on these teams too. So there's both a tryout thing and there's also a money thing that's involved. Though I had a conversation with my neighbor about this, since now both of our neighbors have been referenced in the pod for today. Check that off if you're playing podcast bingo. This dude was telling me that he was a college soccer player, but he said he played with some big name soccer players who I won't name here, that it was a lot of networking and do you have connections sort of stuff going on, right? More than it was how good you are.
What's kind of ironic with that is we tell our kids to have fun, right? We tell them to enjoy the sport, to have fun, even with the participation ribbons, which is a major criticism of youth sports, that everybody gets a participation ribbon. But we will tell them, you have fun, you do all this. But in fact, so much of the fun and the playfulness has been removed from youth sports just by putting them into these leagues. Or, our kids have to be in swim lessons at DU, University of Denver, if they want to be on the DU swim team. That's way different than going and spending 2 hours at the pool every day and just swimming for fun. And so there's so much irony in how we treat the young athletes who participate in these sports and what we're actually trying to get from them, or the things that we as parents actually kind of give value to in our performativity of parenthood and engagement in these leagues. It's just youth sports are kind of they're just way different even from when you and I were kids, and we grew up in very, very different backgrounds. But still, Little League was fun. It wasn't like you had to be – you didn't get that – it was not until you got to middle school or high school that you started participating in Babe Ruth baseball or something like that. Yeah. And even then, that wasn't that expensive. It was very accessible. I guess it did come down to being able to travel and all of these things, but at least there was an outlet at that age for organized sport that was free, whether it be through your middle school, your high school, or, whoever ran the T-ball kind of program. But I don't know.
Well, I think maybe what's happened is that there's been a split, right? That you've had one, like there's a bifurcation where on the one hand, we've got more of the participation. Everybody should get to play. It's about learning life skills, not about the sport and the competition, in and of itself. And then the other split has gone hard the opposite direction. And they're sort of like mutually reinforcing themselves into their opposite corners, right? It's very polarizing that the one gets more and more participation ribbon-y and the other one gets more expensive and more, it has this element of it's supposed to be a meritocracy, but maybe even that's, that combined with money is how you end up following along that track. And this is something else that's important too. We've talked about this on the podcast that I think, I think we were a product of a generation. Maybe some people around our age were already doing this, but it was a newer thing when we were young, I feel like. But we're definitely children of a generation who grew up where our athletes and our big stars who played pro football and pro baseball were all, 2 and 3 and 4 sport athletes. You know what I mean? They were not specialists in high school or maybe even in college, right? I mean, like it's no wonder we don't have any more Deion Sanders or Bo Jacksons, right? The closest example we have is the quarterback from Seattle who played baseball for the Rockies. But mostly what you have is kids figuring out what sports they want to specialize in, or their parents figuring that out for them at super duper young ages, right? Like it's more often to say, oh, I think that your best chance is to be a hockey player, and I want to, push you to hopefully grow up and be a good high school or college or maybe even professional hockey player. So that's what we're doing, right? We're going to do it year round. Oh, you want to play baseball? That's fine. You're going to have a travel team in the summer. You're going to play normal spring and fall ball, and in the winter, we'll do strength and conditioning at the gym or something. I don't know. We're going to we'll rent a batting cage or build one in the backyard. But that specialization early on, I think, is a weird thing. I think it's probably the last 20 years or 25 years that you've had this. Not that people didn't specialize somewhat, but that we're forcing the decision to be made at age 8 or 9 or 10 or something like that. Like you're a basketball player now.
Yeah, I mean, it eliminates the experimentation of trying to figure out what sport you want. And at age 12, like, do you honestly know what sport you enjoy most, or what you're going to enjoy most when you're 16 or 18? No, I fully agree. I mean, I guess to me, the takeaway from what we've talked about thus far is just that parents kind of suck. We're ruining everything. The adults that run these leagues that, that can be athletic directors at high schools. The emphasis that has been placed on sports by adults has to be hurting the experience for children, at a very young age. And that's very problematic to me. That's really messed up. I mean, I guess to me, I want to ask you, I have some issues with participation and the idea of, giving out participation ribbons. I'm not one of those zealots who think, oh, you're all ruining America because of the participation, but I understand that criticism. I do get it. Like, what is it teaching the kids about failure and this stuff? Like, to me, the participation ribbon is a tool put in place by adults to make themselves feel less shitty when their kids lose. Yeah. I mean, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
yeah. Let me hear it.
Yeah, it doesn't really bother me. It doesn't. I don't think it's teaching them a bad lesson. I don't think that kids are leaving youth sports thinking, okay, everybody wins, and that they're like confused that competition still exists. Yeah. But I do think there's an age where you don't necessarily need to enforce the value of hard work to get a result, right? I mean, like, my 4-year-old swam in his first swim meet yesterday and could not be more proud of his participation ribbon, right? And it's what it says participant on it. He freaking loves that thing. Okay. Right? He's 4. I don't care. I don't think he's like being conditioned to not be a good athlete at this point. I think he's rather being encouraged to want to go back and swim some more, right? Does that make sense? He really wants to swim again on Thursday, so he can get another ribbon. I think it's that, little kids like shiny objects, and a participant ribbon is a shiny object.
Is it eliminating the value of failure or perseverance, or at that age does that not matter anyway? Like, is that too young for the mind to really even process?
I mean, let's paint it the flip side. What if we don't have participation ribbons and not your kid, but a kid is doing great and winning all the time, right? And they're constantly bringing home first place trophies at the expense of other kids, right? All these other kids are crying because they're not getting any sort of trophy, and your kid's getting that first place trophy. What happens when your kid starts to not get that trophy, right? Does that make sense? I don't think I was going to be like a pro soccer player or anything like that, but I always thought I was pretty good. And then once I got to high school, and it was like, you know, a small fish in a big pond sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Like, it was difficult for me to not be as good as I had been on my youth teams growing up, or even there I wasn't the best or anything like that. Doesn't the first place ribbon only sort of say there's only reward if you get that trophy? Whereby once your kids face adversity, maybe they're not going to be like, oh, I should work harder to get that trophy. They might be like, well, I didn't get a trophy, so screw it. Mm-hmm. I think I'm not saying that's true, but I'm saying it's as cogent of an argument as why handing out participation trophies kills any sense of competitive drive. I don't think it does that.
Is there a certain age do you think that participation ribbons need to stop?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think at a certain age, kids understand what a participation trophy means, and they don't place much value in it. I mean, by contrast, my 4-year-old who got his participation ribbon yesterday, my daughter who's 7 understands that participation trophy means you lost. Okay. She's not fooled by it at age 7. She knows, because there is also first place and second place and third place ribbons. And after 4th, it's participant. She understands participation trophy means you didn't win, right? So I don't think it's doing. I will make a more totalizing statement. I don't think it's doing any damage at all.
How much of youth sports are just it's just parents kind of injecting their own. What's the word I'm looking for? Regret in their kids. Like, is that a Hollywood storyline that we play up too much? Or do you think, I mean, have you seen that as a parent, that parents actually do this stuff?
Definitely. Yeah, no, I think that I see that person all the time, right? I'm sure you've seen this movie as a movie buff. Have you seen Napoleon Dynamite? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Like, there's a million. You've never met Uncle Rico in real life? Mm-hmm. Right? If I could just go back into high school and coach would have put me in the 4th quarter, I know we would have won state. I would have gone pro. Right? I think there's tons of people who are Uncle Rico, and the people who push their kids too hard, a lot of them are just Uncle Ricos with kids, right? Who are like, I'm going to live vicariously through you, and I'm going to, no kid, at least not a 4 or 5-year-old wants to be a pro athlete. That's something they get, enculturated into them, I assume.
I just worry that youth sports has gotten to such a level now across the entire country that it's kind of it's hurting just being a kid. Like, I think about my kids' schedule, and I understand, like, getting them into things is important because otherwise they get bored sometimes. But it's also like, man, that's a lot of effort required of them to be in swimming, to be in soccer, to be in gymnastics, and all of this stuff. And as a parent, it's difficult because what happens if you miss out on that opportunity for your kid to play a sport, and then when they come 12, 13, 14 years old, they don't have the basic fundamentals of that sport, which actually brings me – that's actually interesting question, because one of our other listeners, Telly Zunica, asked, when should kids begin to play full contact football? And the reason why he asked that is because what if, right, you were an extremely talented kid and you missed that opportunity to play football because your parents didn't want you to, and you kind of missed the boat because by the time you're 18, everybody else has expanded their skills around you, and you just don't have that outlet. Which I get. Like, that's a relevant criticism of the move towards being overly safe about our kids' of health. So I guess, we could apply it to other sports. Like, what if we missed the boat on it? Dude, it's just, and then you add in how much college costs anymore. And so many parents, even now I see this talking about, putting their kids in organized soccer so that way there's a chance their kid has a scholarship, or the same thing with swimming. We're talking about 5-6-year-old kids, but the parents are being extremely serious when they say this. And there's just so many problems. And again, it's not at all centered or beginning at the level of the kid. It's the parent, it's the adult, it's the system that makes this stuff possible. And it's just, it can be really, really depressing, I guess, when we talk about it.
No, I think that, with regard to the when should you start playing football question, all the arguments about technique seem bogus to me. Because if you've ever watched Pee Wee football, it's not like they're learning even the fundamentals very well. And that's not a dig at football. It's true of soccer too, right? Watching 5 and 6 and 7-year-olds, even sometimes 9 and 10-year-olds play soccer is soul crushing because it's so bad. right? That's not why you're doing it to watch good soccer. You're doing it so your kids go and exercise and they meet people and they get to have fun. That's why you should ultimately be doing it. But I would say this too, that if the concern is getting a kid a scholarship, that a good athlete is a good athlete sort of regardless of the sport, right? Does that make sense? And if you give them a well-rounded background in athletics, if they do gymnastics and they swim and they play basketball and maybe they play touch football, if they end up having an aptitude or a bend toward a particular sport, they're going to make it. And a really good example of this is Khalil Mack, who's a linebacker for the Raiders, who played like 2 years of college football, didn't play a down of high school football, and got drafted in the first round. Right? If you're an athlete, you're an athlete. If you got the size and the aptitude to play a sport and you're athletic enough, they'll make that happen. Right? I mean, this goes back to that sort of 3-sport mentality that you didn't have specialists back then. Maybe, John Elway was a better football player than a baseball player, but he, could have gone pro in both of those things and was a legit 2-star athlete. And I suspect in high school, he probably also wrestled or played basketball if we looked up, and was probably pretty good at them. You know what I mean? It was athleticism. And then eventually you get groomed for something, right? Probably where that is and should be happening is college, where if there's a real skill related issue happening, that's where you're going to learn those techniques. Honestly, before that, your coaching is probably not good enough to teach you those things. The average high school football coach is probably not teaching technique as well as they think they are. No offense. Maybe some of them are, but again, the average one is probably not doing that. Now, the exception to this, I think, is this private club AAUP sort of mentality that says, if I only teach you this one thing, you will have better skills. What that probably does, though, is creates players who are not necessarily as athletic as some of their peers, but are better only because they've cultivated those skills. But I suspect that it's the exception, not the rule, that those kids make it super far, right? I bet a lot of them get sized out. I bet a lot of them get, sort of jaded or burnt out. But I think that largely our professional sports are comprised of the best athletes who fell into the different sports for a variety of reasons, most of which are not that they chose that sport when they were 9 or 10.
So, okay, if that's the case, right, if it's just the fact by the time you get to age 18, it's going to be pretty clear that you are physically better than those around you. Do you think that there's plenty of damage that's being done in those 8 years prior? I don't mean like overall, general, but are kids getting turned off by sports because of the experience they have from maybe age 8 to 18? And is that playing into the negative stigma that is attached to sports and sports consumption in our society now? You and I talk about sports. Yeah. We just assume that people love watching sports, but as a professor, right, who talks about sports probably too much, it's pretty clear that when I look at the faces of some of these kids that they hate sports. And I wonder how much of that has to do with the experience they had when they didn't have the option and they had to participate in, Little League baseball or something like that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't know that this is true based on data or even necessarily my personal experience, but I suspect that becoming a pro athlete, regardless of the path that you take to do that, whether or not you're a 3-sport athlete or whether or not you played AAUP basketball or whether or not your mom and dad forced you to, or whether or not they just facilitated you playing it, or whether or not you played in big money leagues or free sport leagues, I suspect that that you made it is more random than winning the lottery. Mm-hmm. Right? It's not. I don't think that it's true that any parent, if they really try hard and spend enough money and put their kid in the right situations, that will have much effect at all as to whether or not they become professional athletes. I really don't. Mm-hmm. Right. I think that if you do that, it's probably not the overriding reason that they became pro. In fact, I would say maybe they became a professional in spite of that, not because of that. Right. Does that make sense? That I truly do believe it's athleticism. So the secondary conclusion that I would draw, again, based on nothing at all, just my instinct, is that I'm certain that for as many players who have been pushed really hard by their parents from a young age to focus on one single sport at the expense of vacations or playing with friends or a social life or whatever, or pursuing other interests that they might have encountered otherwise, playing the guitar or being in drama club or being a debater or something like that. For everyone who's made it, I suspect there are hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of horror stories of people who, resent their dad because of it, or resent their mom because of it. And what I can say for sure is that I've seen it. I've seen it at my daughter's 7-year-old soccer games. Parents where I'm like, whoa, chill out a little bit. And then I one time was kind of not yelling at my kid, but speaking loudly in her direction. She oftentimes just gets distracted playing soccer and starts to look around. And I'm like, hey, look at the ball. And even one dude was like, man, calm down, she's fine. And I was like, yeah, I wasn't yelling at her because I wanted to win. I just wanted to pay attention, right? But I mean, even some people might have seen me as being a little too over the top. And I would put myself at like a 3 out of 10 on that scale compared to what I've seen from other people. Usually I just sort of sit there and watch and clap. You know what I mean? But I've definitely seen it. It's like, oh man, I can't tell this story. Never mind. Off the air story.
Off the air stories. So that's what, with all subscribers, right? They want to put that out there. Patreon subscribers. That's why we need a Patreon account. Hey, I want to ask you one thing before we close up shop. If you could change one thing about youth sports, or one or two things, is there anything that you would immediately change in how leagues are set up, or how, would you? I'll start. I think that every parent should have some sort of class. You should be required to attend a class. You should also be required to umpire a game, or serve as a referee for a soccer match. I think that should be part of it, because you should be on the other side of the asshole parent yelling at you about a call in a 3rd grade Little League game, because that's, you need some empathy, you need some perspective. So immediately, that's what train the parents, right? As much as you're trying to govern the youth, train the parents. What about you?
No, I think that makes sense. I think maybe something that would help a lot is that we try and teach kids how to play the game at a young age, as opposed to teaching them skills that would be useful in the game. Right? There's no reason to go out with your 3-year-old and try and drop them in a soccer game. They're just going to run around and do what kids are going to do. Yeah. Right? Does that make sense? Like teaching it more as let's play silly games together that teach a skill set, that later on, when you're actually old enough to understand how a game works, you can actually play that game. And that feeds into a bigger thing for me, which is I do think we sort of want our kids to play sports weirdly at the wrong ages, right? I don't understand 3-year-old t-ball. Like, kids can't throw a ball, they can't catch a ball, they can't hit a ball. Soccer is a great sport to start with, not because I love it or because the World Cup is going on right now, but because the ball is intended to be on the ground. Right? Does that make sense? You don't have to keep it in the air, which is every other sport. You need to pass the ball to someone in the air. That's volleyball, that's basketball, that's football. Those sports, you need a little bit more sort of dexterity to be able to have. So I think if we sort of scaled back when kids were playing what and sort of added skills as it went forward, that might help, because I think part of it too is expectations. Like, that you're concerned about your kid winning a game that none of the kids on the field are capable of playing is mind-blowing. Yep. We should all just be out there. Everything that you said is true. We should all just be out there being cheerleaders and supporting people. And again, I take your point one step farther and say, volunteering, being a part of it, going out there and coaching and that sort of stuff, I think. So it's not, I think a lot of people treat it like a service when it's not. Like, it's an hour of daycare and I'm going to leave my kid there and I'm going to go sit on the side and look at my phone, or I'm going to drop my kid off and I'm going to leave. And then you got one dude trying to, herd 27-year-olds, and it's impossible for him to do it. It's surprising how often there's not a bunch of other moms or dads out there who are just trying to help, stand around, shag balls. Exactly. Be a part of it.
Mike Pope just made a comment on our Facebook page, and I think he's kind of spot on. It's just that, sports in a lot of ways can be used to teach us patience and perseverance and all of this. And I think so many of today's youth, and even the parents who bring these kids into leagues, they want that instant gratification. They want the game that's either win or lose. And I understand like the value of losing and how that can be very productive. But what you're pointing out is, we're wanting these kids at 6-7 years old to play games in which people win and people lose. And that can be like, that's I suppose to me, that's impatient, because we should be teaching them the skills, the core skills that will actually improve the kind of play that they have by the time they're 10 or 12. And so, I like that. I like that criticism a lot, Brian. I think that's really solid. But like, how much of that is being pushed forward by parents to have those competitive games. Like, I'm just imagining my kid really not giving a shit whether or not she was going to play a game at 5 years old that counted as winning and losing. I don't think she understands what that means yet. I don't think she cares. And so, everything, it might just be better for her and kids that age to, have an hour-long practice instead of these games in which somebody wins and somebody loses, just because it's not – I don't know how beneficial it is. Now, that obviously that changes by the time you get 12, 13, right? And those kinds of things are extremely important, being able to know what it means to win and know what it means to lose. But I think youth sports have become such a business, and they become such a problematic way for parents to parent that we need to kind of reconsider that and consider why we create these leagues and why we put our kids in sports. But do you have any closing comments?
Yeah, that the point that you just brought up by Michael was one that got discussed in either a Radio Lab episode or a This American Life episode. I can't find it, but there's a really good discussion about this same phenomenon, that people don't have the same competitive drive because of reset culture or something like that. And I think it's possible that Mike Gundy may have made similar comments, that the players don't have like mental toughness anymore because of something like video games. So I think there might be something to that argument. I think there's some good discussions about why that statement in and of itself, not that Mike was saying this, but could be couched as this sort of like one of those damn millennials sort of comments or whatever. Not saying you're saying that, but it's worth sort of thinking about that when we talk about that concept. The other thing, just trying to find that podcast really quick, what I found was there's just a rash of articles about why over competition on young kids is bad for their mental health. There's tons of studies about this. So I think all the stuff that we talked about today sort of points at maybe that formulating, contributing to bad relationships or whatever, but it might be even worse than that. It might be setting kids up for, tougher life mentally.
How much does that change the more that esports become on the rise too? I mean, the competitiveness in that is obviously increasing as the money gets pumped into it. So it's going to complicate even that theory of what's to happen. But we are out of time for today, my friend. Everybody, if you don't already, make sure you find us on Facebook. We're fb.me/sportsnerds. We're on Instagram @sports.nerds, and we are on Twitter _sportsnerds. You can reach us through all three of those platforms. We're also on YouTube, so if you want to go to our Facebook page, and then on the left you'll see a YouTube link. You can click on that and get yourself to our YouTube page. If you could subscribe to our page, that would be fantastic. So that way we can get the number where we can personalize our link. That would be fantastic. Brian, I hope we covered all our bases today. I think we did a good job. It was nice to get the youth sports conversation off the table, because I do find it somewhat exhausting. It's just hard, man. And like parents are, and it's mostly because of the parents. It's all because of the parents. It's rarely the child, the kid. And I know it's only going to get more difficult as things become more competitive. But all right, enjoy your second set of World Cup games, and we'll probably dive deep into some World Cup talk next week. But all right, old boy, you have a great day.
Yeah, later.
See ya.